Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to East Central Missouri and the world, and welcome to the James Strong Show podcast, podcast number 235. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your day. I appreciate it. This podcast was recorded on the morning of Saturday, September the 11th, from the James Strong Studio in Western St. Charles County. Well, today is the 20th anniversary of the terrorist attacks, the 9/11 attacks, the terrorist attacks on the World Trade Centers. This podcast is not going to be about that per se, and it's in no disrespect. I don't think it's an unimportant event. But the reason I'm not doing the podcast on 9/11 per se is because if you listen to the podcast, to the James Strong Show podcast on a regular basis, you'll know why. I don't do what everybody else does, okay? Everybody and their dad are going to do some type of a 9/11 memorial, retrospect, what does it mean type of podcast. I'm not going to do that per se, but I am going to, how can I put this? The podcast is going to be what we all should be doing 20 years after the terrorist attacks. And that is living our lives the way we want to live our lives, because that's what it's all about, isn't it? And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk a little bit about how things are in this country. And to those naysayers of you, those of you who are naysayers out there who think that the U.S. has gone to hell in a handbasket and our best days are behind us and the Republic is lost, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you couldn't be more wrong. And I'm going to give you examples of places where it has, in fact, gone to hell in a handbasket. And, in fact, the republics are gone. And, in fact, things are truly bad. And when you compare them to what we have here today, not only are our lives, is our economy, are the things that we do heads and shoulders above these other places, but everybody in this country, comparatively speaking, has it so good. I've mentioned many times that I live a truly charmed life, and I do. And so do you, if you really look hard at your life, especially compared to how things were in the past in this country and how things are currently in many, many, many places in this world. The title of today's podcast is The Kids Are All Right and So Are You. And I've borrowed that from the old Who song, okay? I'm going to go ahead and before I go into the podcast, I'll give you an update on the Jaguar, the 1951 Jaguar Mark 7 that we're restoring. I haven't done an update in a while because I haven't had a ton to report. Basically, the car is currently at the media blasters being blasted and all the rust removed. As soon as that's done, we're going to put the car in what we call put it in poly. In other words, seal the sandblasted material, because once you take all protective coatings off of that steel, it's going to rust in no time, okay? So it's got to be media blasted. They're in the process of doing that. That's a long process because it's a big car, because they have to get into every nook and cranny to blast that thing properly. Then it has to be poly sealed, so it seals everything. At that point, we will then take a look at it and truly find out what sheet metal needs to be replaced, what we need to do, and the course of action we actually need to take to turn this thing into the beautiful car that it's going to be when this is finished. In the meantime, I am cleaning, polishing, painting all these old parts that were taken off of the car before it was media blasted, so that when I finally get the car back, I can assemble this thing and get it up and running. By the way, the engine and transmission are currently being rebuilt as we speak, because we're keeping the same 3.4 liter overhead cam, aluminum head, cast iron block engine that the car came with. So a little bit of work has to be done to restore that 70-year-old engine to like new factory form. So that's what's going on with me and the Jaguar. When I'm done with this podcast, I'll be going to the shop to work on those parts forthwith. Now, on with the podcast. The kids are all right, and so are you. Sure, this is the anniversary of 9/11, And that was a horrible time in our history. And a lot of people who I disagree with just say, oh, 9/11, woe is me. These are bad times. The crash is near. The republic is dead. Wrong. 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 As I like to say sometimes, everybody's entitled to their own opinion. But if this is what you think, friend, your opinion is just wrong. So you're entitled to have an opinion, but that opinion is just wrong. I'm going to prove to you why. We have had this woe is me mentality for a long time. I will use my parents, as my father in particular, as an example. When he was a boy, they had air raid drills where they had to all go to the bomb shelters because everyone knew any time now that Russia was going to bomb this country and take over the world. Friends, Russia is a military power, but basically they're a third world nation with the bomb. Russia is not a threat to take over anything. They don't even have an economy that anyone pays attention to. It's ran by a dictator, and the vast majority of people in that country still have trouble making ends meet and doing what they want to do. Okay? So forget about Russia taking over the world. That never happened. But that was the big fear when my 85-year-old father was growing up, okay? And it didn't come to fruition. What about the naysayers that say, well, the United States is just one of the great empires that's going to go ahead and fall by the wayside? Because they all have. Look at Rome, Greece, the British Empire, to a lesser extent, Germany and Japan in less than 100 years ago. Here's a news flash about all of those economies. Yes, they were great economies that ruled much of, if not all of the free world, or the world, I should say, at one time. But the news flash is each and every one of those places are still first world countries, and they're a great place to live in today. They enjoy freedom today. Every one of those places. Rome, which is Italy, Greece, the British Empire, the British UK, I should say now, Germany, Japan, those are all great places to live. Now, has our influence on the world waned? Sure it has. But again, as I've said many, many, many times, what you have to remember is in the 50s and 60s, the reason America ruled the roost is because we were the only ones left standing. I mean, Russia never was a world power. And after World War II, they lost 10 million troops. 10 million. The United States lost over 400,000, close to 500,000, which is nothing to sneeze at. But the Soviet Union lost 10 million troops. And Stalin killed at least that many because they wouldn't listen to him. So basically, they purged their economy via war and to get people in line. Okay? And we're not Russia. Neither is Rome. Neither is Greece. Neither is Britain. Neither is Germany. Neither is Japan. Nobody goes that way. Now, my 9/11 show today is going to feature how others live compared to us. Now, perhaps it will show you that while there is room for improvement, and there's always room for improvement, dear listeners, always. While there's room for improvement, we really lived charmed lives. Now, I'm going to mention a handful of news stories that you may not have heard. In fact, you probably haven't heard these news stories from traditional media sources. But then that's why you listen to this show, right? And this is not a damning of traditional media sources. It's just that during their little snaps in time, their demographics, what they think their sponsors want, what their bases want. These aren't stories that are sexy, that are fun, that are that are titillating. Use the word that you want, but they're stories that are very much reflective upon what we have in this world today. Okay, and let's start with a story from the world's largest democracy, India, getting to be a better place to live. But then compared to what? Okay. And this is This is no disrespect to my friends in India. I have a lot. The James Strong Show is very popular in India via an app called GeoSavan. So I have a lot of listeners in India. So please don't think that I'm dissing your country at all. Your country is a developing market. India is a growing economy. India is trying to figure things out. They're a young democracy, relatively speaking, and they've got lots of problems, many which have to do with the fact that it's full of poor people, okay? But they're trying their best. But something to remember. I mean, if you look at automobiles, what's your average run-of-the-mill, middle-class, good, not great, dependable, not exciting car? Ford. Okay, nobody ever says, wow, look at the Ford supercar. Okay, maybe the GT, but Ford doesn't make a supercar. Ford doesn't make ultra luxurious cars. Ford manufactures practical, dependable cars that get you from point A to point B dependably, cheap, or inexpensive, I should say, and with a certain level of comfort, okay? Not luxury, but certainly comfort. Ford makes good cars. I've owned Fords in the past. We own a Ford now, and a Ford Taurus, which is a wonderful car, okay? But it's hardly a top-of-the-line luxury car. It's a middle-of-the-road, middle-class market car. Here's the headline out of India. Ford to close plants in India, a tough market for auto giants. By the way, each and every one of these stories is out of the Wall Street Journal, just so you know. The U.S. car maker, Ford, accumulated almost $2 billion in losses in a country that prefers budget-friendly automobiles. Now, Ford Motor Company's decision to stop making cars in India deals a blow to Prime Minister Modi's domestic manufacturing drive while highlighting the difficulty foreign automakers have gaining a foothold in the Indian market. On Thursday, Ford said it would shut manufacturing operations in India after accumulating more than $2 billion in losses during the past 10 years. Ford cited weaker than expected demand for its new vehicles. Now, Chief Executive Jim Farley called the move difficult but necessary to stay profitable and focus on growth. Now, Ford and most other Western automakers have found it difficult to stake a claim in India's passenger vehicle market, which is dominated by smaller, budget-friendly passenger cars produced by Indian units of Japan's Suzuki Motors and South Korean's Hyundai Motors. Together, these two companies account for 60% of new car sales. Now, these are divisions of those two car makers. You will not see your standard Suzuki or your standard Hyundai in India. These are scaled down basic models for the Indian market, so understand that. Now, although Ford has been in India for 3 decades, its market share last month amounted to just 1.4%, according to India's Federation of Automobiles Dealers. Now, rivals like Renault, Honda, Nissan, they fared a little bit better, but they only had about a 3% market share. Ford's decision to shut its production plants in India is the latest setback for Prime Minister Modi's Made in India initiative as the country's economy tentatively recovers from a deep recession induced by the coronavirus pandemic. Okay. Ford's decision also follows exits by General Motors, MAN Truck and Bus of Germany, and Harley-Davidson. This has all happened since 2017. Toyota Motor last year blamed high taxes for a decision to halt its expansion into India. Now, India's automotive industry entered a decline in 2019, a slowdown that has been exacerbated by the pandemic. Okay, why is this important to what to 9/11, to what we're all about? Okay, so another company pulls out of India. Well, Ford is doing very well as a company after losing $2 billion in India, billion in losses. Compared to their profits, they're still doing just fine. Now, why is this important? Again, like I said before, Ford is not BMW. They make modest, dependable, mainstream vehicles. And the Indian market can't support that kind of vehicle. Now, basically, Indian cars are glorified go-karts. They're like golf carts that you see in the neighborhoods in community.